welcome to Connect the World. I'm Linda Kincaid, live from Atlanta. Let's get started. An outcry of international voices is openly casting doubt on the narrative from Saudi Arabia over the disappearance and death of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Even the US president, who had defended the kingdom, appears to be changing his stance. Donald Trump told the Washington Post on Saturday, obviously there's been deception and there's been lies. But he stopped short of blaming the Saudi Crown Prince for Khashoggi's death. Mr. Trump told the newspaper, nobody has told me he's responsible. Nobody has told me he's not responsible. We haven't reached that point. Well, meanwhile, CNN has learned from a source close to the Saudi royal palace that Khashoggi's body was handed over to a local collaborator. That source said the Saudis don't know what happened to it afterward. But President Trump seems to think the mystery will eventually be solved.
No, we don't. Nobody seems to know. Somebody knows, but nobody of the various investigation groups at this moment know, but we'll find out. It's a concern. We'd like to find out where it is and what happened, and I think we're inching our way there.
Well, CNN's Nick Robertson joins us now from Istanbul, and our Sam Kiley is following the Saudi response from Riyadh. I want to start first with Nick, looking at the international reaction, because President Trump here in the US has come under a lot of criticism for believing, his inclination to believe the changing narrative from the Saudis. But it's also testing the relationship of the UK and its partnership with Saudi Arabia. Just take us through some of the international reaction you're seeing today.
Sure, I think the strongest reaction really is coming from the group of three principal European nations, at least in terms of global diplomacy, Germany, France and the UK, joint statements today saying that there was fear and concern that there may have been that Jamal Khashoggi may have met a violent death. But the announcement that had actually happened, that he was dead, has come as a shock. And what they're saying is now that there needs to be a credible investigation into the events of the 2nd of October, that there needs to be, in their words, credible facts revealed. And they say that their judgment, essentially, on their future relationship with Saudi Arabia is going to depend on what those credible facts reveal, that the quality and strength of the relationship with Saudi Arabia depends on shared values between these countries and Saudi Arabia, a shared value of respect for international norms. So essentially what they're saying at the moment is they're shocked to hear that Jamal Khashoggi died in this way, that what they're hearing so far doesn't measure up for them, that there needs to be more credible information forthcoming, and that they will make a judgment based on that information on the future relationship. And I think perhaps a strong line coming from Dominic Raab this morning, the British Secretary for overseeing Brexit negotiations with the European Union, on one of the British political commentary chat shows this morning, delivering a very, very strong message to the Saudis. This is what he had to say. I'll read you his statement here. I don't think it's credible, he says, talking about what he has heard and what the British government has heard from Saudi officials so far about what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. I don't think it's credible. I think it's a terrible case. We support the Turkish investigation into it, and the British government wants to see people held to account for that death. I think there is a serious question mark over the account that's been given, and is talking about the account there from Saudi officials. So at the moment, the sniff test for Europe, at least, if not for President Trump, is one of a heavy, heavy dose of skepticism, and a long way to go for Saudi officials to convince their European allies that Khashoggi's death was as an accident, as they're essentially saying at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. Certainly a lot of skepticism, a lot of questions. I want to go to Sam for a little bit more on that, because that's what we're hearing from the West. Within Saudi Arabia, how is this story being portrayed?
Well, within Saudi Arabia, there's an interesting split, if you like, in terms of how the story is being portrayed. In the Arabic language newspapers, it's pretty straight down the middle, quoting the government, assurances that there'll be transparency, not reacting with any kind of horror, much less surprise, that Mr. Khashoggi is now agreed to be dead by the government here, that 18 people have been arrested and that 5 very senior officials have been dismissed from their positions, including 2 very senior officials that were very close indeed to the Crown Prince. They're playing it very straight down the middle. They're getting a lot of support for that line, Saudi Arabia, that is, from regional allies, Jordan, Kuwait. Really, most of the Islamic world has rode in behind the official position of the Saudis that their investigation so far suggests that Mr. Khashoggi died accidentally during a struggle in the consulate with Saudi officials. But there's been an interesting development in terms of how the English language press is handling it. This is the Arab News. It is a newspaper that Mr. Khashoggi used to be the deputy editor of. Front page picture of him. He was a good man, goodbye, gentle giant. Then on the page 3, on the inside, an entire page devoted to their former colleague. One former colleague saying he was a huggable panda, another saying he was passionate about Saudi Arabia. And then there's a lead article by the editor-in-chief, Faisal Abbas. And in it, he says, and I think it's very well worth pointing out, he writes, among other things, he says of Khashoggi, he repeatedly declared his love for the kingdom and its people. Even though he disagreed with some of the practices of the current Saudi leadership, he remained loyal. Now, this is, I think, an indication of 2 things. The first is there is a cynical view that within the Saudi establishment, the royal court is trying to establish the idea that Mr. Khashoggi was by no means an enemy. He was a friendly critic. They didn't want him dead. Perhaps they wanted him to come home. And the other part of that statement by Mr. Abbas, though, is pointing at the system and reminding them that in the view of his journalistic colleagues here, some of whom I've spoken to today, he was seen as a patriot and loyal to the government, not a danger to the future of stability of Saudi Arabia, but a friendly critic. And by implication, it was therefore unconscionable that he would be subjected to some kind of interrogation in the consulate, much less killed. Linda?
Absolutely. All right, Sam Kiley for us. And our Nick Robertson, good to have you both with us on this story. Thanks so much.